Hello and welcome to another edition of another book review. This week I'll be reviewing 3 Miles Down by Harry Turtledove. I'll talk very briefly about the author, go into a spoiler-free overview of the plot, talk about what I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, who I'd recommend the book to, and we'll probably leave it there. I may or may not read Crossfire by Nancy Kress. That's kind of on my next to read list, but I may or may not get to it. I have some other stuff going on, so that may get pushed. Um, Harry Turtledove. If you gave me a list of authors that I had, if you when I started this channel, I started it roughly 7 years ago, and Harry Turtledove is someone who I was just thinking about this before the video. I've probably reviewed, or excuse me, I've probably read 11 of his books over the course of my life, which goes back to probably when I started reading seriously. It was probably about 20 years ago, and so of all the authors, other than maybe Neil Stephenson and maybe Stephen King, as far as the number of books I've read of an author, he's up there. I think this is like the 11th book, 12 if you count his short story collection. For those who have not read him, an introduction, just he is incredibly prolific, and he typically writes in what John known as alternative history. His most famous book is still probably Guns of the South, which is about what would happen if uh, white Afrikaners went back in time and gave AK-47s to the Confederate Army, allowing them to win in the Civil War, the American Civil War, and the ramifications of that. He also did one of my favorite series of all times that I'm still surprised has not been made into like a prestige HBO show or like a long running series, which is World War. Those books are really, really, really good, and I really enjoyed them quite a bit, which is what would happen if aliens had attacked the world when the World War II was actively going on. There's active battles, and the world basically unites to repel these to fight back against the aliens known as the race. That series of books is also really excellent. He wrote one of my favorite, mostly writes alternative history. He also sometimes dives into just more standard science fiction stuff. He wrote one of my favorite time travel stories, which is actually like split into half. It's two separate stories that are kind of you read kind of they're kind of speaking to each other. You can kind of read them separately, but they work really well as a pair. In that those two stories are called 40 Counting Down and 21 Counting Up. Um, so it's just like very, very, very well known in that genre. This book, 3 Miles Down, is set in the 1970s. I believe it's 1974, and is concerned with a character named Jerry, who is a marine biologist. He's like a grad student, and I believe marine biology is his subject matter. At the beginning of the book, he studies kind of whale songs, and he is quickly kind of taken into this idea of there possibly being alien life forms at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And so he gets involved in this mission to go and check this out to see what exactly is at the bottom of the ocean. And he kind of is working alongside like CIA and other people who have this like scheme to try to pull this thing from the bottom of the ocean into a ship and kind of study it. And that's where the book starts. The book is really kind of goes from there. A lot of the book is concerned with his um, kind of disillusionment with the American government. This is during Watergate, where Richard Nixon is basically in the process of resigning, and Ford is kind of taking over. And so there's a lot of disillusionment that he has with the federal government and how that kind of interacts with this mission to retrieve this alien life form. And that's, to me, the best part of the book is I felt that the character of Jerry was really well developed, and he felt like a real person. He has different relationships in his life with his father, his fiance, and his colleagues on this boat that's doing this work, and also one of his best friends. And so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Um, if you've read a lot of Harry Turtledove, which I have, you see a lot of kind of the same things. He kind of is really good at like period specific things in the book. And the book is largely set in like Los Angeles, and so you kind of see him going through the this area and this grad student, how he was living and like driving these like beat up cars and stuff like that. So there's attention to detail that you have, the restaurants that he eats at. the character is Jewish, and so that plays a role in some places in the book. And so I just really enjoyed all that stuff. There's a Steely Dan record that opens the book that he's listening to, a Steely Dan record. So all that, those little touches of stuff, I really enjoyed kind of the period specific technology that was there, and just kind of this kind of really strange period of time in American history where you had this kind of unprecedented thing happen at high levels of government and what that meant for people, and kind of the dividing line of that. There's also a lot of the character is very young in the sense that he's a grad student. A lot of the people that he's working with are of an older generation, so there's an element of that in the book as well, where he's kind of a fish out of water in the sense of he's kind of trying to communicate with the older people, and kind of that dividing line, that generational dividing line. I really enjoyed that as well. There's one character in particular he forms a relationship with who's an older character who works at Rand, who's also involved in this, in their relationship I really enjoyed. So I enjoyed it quite a bit. There's a huge downside of this book for people. And I should say before, it didn't bother me because I'm used to kind of Turtledove style, and I enjoyed the characters and what they were doing. If you're someone who reads the cover of the book and you're like, well, this is a first contact story, so we are going to meet the most first contact stories. If you think of something like Arrival, or the story that it's based off of, or like Hail Mary or something like that, where there's like direct contact with aliens, and you're looking to have like these deep understanding of alien cultures and all that stuff. This book is really not as concerned with that, and this book very much felt like the first part of a series. He has not announced a sequel to this. I would read a sequel, Harry, if you're watching, but when I was looking at the Goodreads reviews, they were kind of lower than I thought they were going to be, and one of the reasons I imagine that is the book felt very much like the first installment of a series, and so if that is something that you don't know going in, if you're like thinking we're going to have this like these contacts, and I'm going to learn about these different alien races and cultures and stuff like that, the book is really not focused on that as much. So you should be forewarned about that. I don't think that's really a spoiler. I think that's helpful for you to know if that's something you want to see. It's really more of this character and him coming into certain knowledge and deciding what he wants to do with that knowledge, and questioning the government's role in all these things. And so it very much is in some ways kind of like more of a character-driven novel than it is really what you probably would see in like a first contact story, like Arrival. Excuse me. The story of your life, I think, is the Ted Chiang short story that's based on. Both of those things to me, Arrival, that story, Hail Mary, are much more about like alien cultures and how do aliens relate to human beings and stuff. This book is really not that concerned about it as much about those things as this character Jerry and what he's doing as he's kind of brought into this world where these creatures exist, and the CIA is doing these things, and this exploration and all this stuff. So that is something you should know about this book. I wasn't really bothered by that. I was kind of there for the hang. There are definitely times where there are some digressions in the book that you probably are like, I don't know if we needed all 288 pages here. There are probably places where you could trim. Again, I'm giving him maybe the benefit of the doubt and saying, well, maybe there's things that are going to be used in this for book 2 and 3 if they ever come to fruition. But I enjoyed it while I was reading it. I didn't really have any major qualms with it, but yeah, it's the pacing issue to me. It's like I can imagine people being like, there's all these digressions about the food and the trips that people are taking and where they're driving, and him having these discussions with his graduate advisor, the dissertation advisor, that doesn't really ultimately matter all that much. And so I could see people like wanting this book to be tightened up. So that may be something for people who are bothered by that. I was there for the hang, so I wasn't as bothered by it, and I was kind of used to. Turtledove tends to have kind of a freewheeling style, to where there's sometimes where you're like, he's not really someone who's interested in telling these like really tight stories. He's not like a Tom Clancy or someone who's like trying to give you like scene. It is a lot of him kind of like feeling his way through the history, and I think this is probably history that a lot of which Southern California in the 60s, Southern California in the 70s is, I get the sense that something he knows pretty intimately. There's some calls to like, current politics in there, in today's politics, and so if you are bothered by that type of thing, the book may bother you a little bit as well. this is something he does in all of his books. And the message of all his books is ultimately like human beings, no matter what culture they come from, have certain commonalities within the human experience, and trying to find ways for us to connect to each other in that kind of universal understanding of humans, and seeing each other equally as human beings is something that's part of his mission, kind of all his books. At least I think, and I think that is present in this book as well, which I appreciated. So it was a quick read. I read this in 3 days. It's pretty breezy. If you've read Turtledove before and are not scared by having maybe a first book in a series, I think it may be a first book in a series. It ends in a point where, if you're looking for that first contact story, I think you may be a little disappointed. If you're there just for the characters, for this hang, then I think no matter what happens, if there is a second or third book, it doesn't matter. You have kind of this character study, which I found to be really interesting. But that is 3 Miles Down. I would recommend, if someone's looking where to start for Turtledove, I think if you're more on the like pop alternative history side of things, Guns of the South is a fun place to start because it's standalone. So you don't have to read anything else. You can read that. How Few Remain, which is more of his, I would say, a plausible. If you were looking for what is a plausible explanation of how the southern states could have at least sued for some kind of a peace, could have won the American Civil War, How Few Remain is a really, I think it's relatively respected in terms of historian circles, in terms of how would this actually, what would have had to have happened for the Southern Army to have won, quote unquote, won this war. And that, like Turtledove does with many things, this kicks off this whole huge series of books that goes on and on and on. But How Few Remain, if you read that on its own, that stands alone as well. So if you're more of like the pop historian person and you don't really mind kind of out there concepts, I find when people come from like literary spaces, sometimes Harry Turtledove is a guy that they kind of are just like, what? Like, how are you mixing like this idea of like having time travel within this alternative history is just so bizarre to them. And I think I'm, for some reason, I'm not as bothered by it. I just kind of can go with it. But if you are bothered by that idea, I would say How Few Remain. If you're not bothered by that idea, Guns of the South is a good single book entry place. I think that if you are interested in the concept of what would happen if the global powers during the Second World War united in order to fight off this alien race that was a much more powerful opponent than any of them could fight alone, then that series of books to me is a lot of fun. The World War series. So any of those places I think are good places to start. He has, like I said, so many different books that depending on like your area of history as well. If there's an area of history that you're more interested in, he has a book called Ruled Britannica that I believe is about William Shakespeare. And there's an alternative history there. There's an alternative history about, I'm trying to think of what other like really well-known books he has. Those are the big ones that I know of. He also has a YA series that I have never really read, but all that stuff I would recommend reading. He has a style to his writing. It's not everybody's cup of tea. And yeah, he's not going to win any awards for his literary prowess. It's more of like the ideas and the feeling like someone has done the historical research to like make this feel like a real lived in place. The 70s is not that far away, so there's not really the level of research that I think he would do with something like this as opposed to something like Guns of the South or like How Few Remain. But he does his work. It felt real to me. I enjoyed it. There weren't really any places where I said that doesn't seem plausible. There's a couple places, I guess, in the book where there's a character who's seen as a very smart character, and he does a couple things throughout the book that I'm just a little boneheaded, but these are small, like nitpicky things for me. Overall, I really enjoyed the book. Would recommend to Harry Turtledove fans, and if you are at all interested in kind of usually you have first contact stories that are in the present or in the future. Very rarely do you see first contact stories that are set in the past that I'm aware of. And so I thought this was kind of a new thing that I had not seen before, and so I'm also giving him credit for that. If you don't like Harry Turtledove and you don't like his style of writing, it's not different here. So 3 Miles Down. Harry Turtledove. Until next time, thank you for watching the channel. Please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't done already. Like I said, I'll come back probably I don't know when I'll be back. I have some other stuff going on, but I'll try to be back in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Wishing everybody happy 2026. And until next time, bye.